He had his gun, so he just swung it open.
I start to notice that, the atmosphere feels a little bit weird.
First thing he seen was this 6.5 foot tall, broad shoulder, dark hair. That freaked him out.
We hadn't talked to her about like life and death and what any of that means. She's 3 years old,
So we turned around. Suddenly there's a whole tree falling across the road.
And she was describing to us that, there was a deceased person that she could see visually.
You're listening to Cryptid Clues, where we tackle the ever-expanding history and mystery of monsters and supernatural madness every Monday. You can find us at CryptidClues.ca for more information, or even check out exclusive content and support us at patreon.com/CryptidClues.
Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of Cryptid Clues. I am your host Taylor, and this week we're diving back into maybe that paranormal, alien, extraterrestrial kind of combination with a dash of something else mixed in. But before we get into that, check out our podcast feeds, because last week we dropped a combo episode on Bat Squatch and Sheep Squatch, and before that we released an episode focusing on the Morag of Lake Morar. Some really neat cryptid content on the feeds right now. However, this week on this topic, I was watching some videos and found one that involved a person acquiring a mirror. And thinking nothing of it, they placed the mirror in their bedroom, and not long after, they began experiencing horrendous night terrors and seeing strange apparitions in their room at night. And this made me think there must be more to this. I was sure others possibly experienced the same thing, and I began the hunt and tried to gather more insight into mirrors in general. So let's start at the very beginning with a little bit of history. In the archaeological record, the oldest reflective surfaces found were made of polished silver. This dates back as far as 4,000 years ago before Christ. And of course, we have to take into account, aside from mirrors, there was other reflective surfaces, certain types of natural metals, certain bodies of water that were really clear and calm and not super wavy. You could see reflections in, but it wouldn't be evidently found that mirrors were used as grooming tools until the 5th century before Christ. Illustrations depicted on ancient Greek pottery shows Greeks gazing into hand mirrors and whatnot. And there was another interesting depiction that we found that comes from the Epic of Gilgamesh. This is ancient Sumerian mythology where the goddess Ilana is said to have used a bronze mirror to gaze upon the underworld. This mirror is sometimes interpreted as being a physical object, and other times simply just a metaphor for her ability to see into other realities. But bear that in mind for where we kind of spin and direct this episode later on. Now, of course, any scientific factual evidence of mirrors being portals or gateways to other realities or planes of existence remains to be seen. The concept surrounding mirrors as this type of tool has existed for centuries, though. So let's take a look at some of these peculiar situations. And oddly enough, I'm going to start off with what is a false claim of a haunted mirror called the Lugosi mirror. An actor named Bela Lugosi, best known for playing Dracula in 1931, had acquired a mirror and reportedly used it in occult attempts to contact his deceased wife. Unfortunately for him, he invited something else to the mirror, and this thing was unwanted and unworldly. So the first big red flag is that Lugosi had no wives past before he had passed himself. The man was married 5 times, but divorced 4 of them, and with the 5th one, he was in the works of divorcing her as well. She was much younger than he was. I believe it was 37 years younger to him. And she lived on fine after he had passed on his own accord. So Lugosi eventually passed away in 1956. Occult activities were questioned having ever really happened at this point, but as for the mirror, it certainly was a real mirror. And shortly after Lugosi had died, it's reported that a man named Frank Salatri had moved into the former home of Lugosi just as a renter. He didn't purchase it, but it seems here's where things get a little convoluted. The mirror was present in the home, but Salatri moved out once more, leaving the mirror behind. And the story, which is proven to be less than accurate, claims he was unfortunately murdered in this home with the mirror present, and that the mirror was basically a magnet absorbing the negative energy from the murder. Now, Salatri was murdered, sadly, in real life, and his case has not been solved, unfortunately. It would appear that the mirror was not present and did not carry on with Salatri after the Lugosi residence. So with all that scored away, let's look into something else possibly haunted and, again, mirror-oriented. Bloody Mary. Now, let it be known that spending prolonged amounts of time in a dark or dimly lit room can yield in hallucinations of sorts. I know personally I've experienced this, where you see shadows or figures and feel that slight panic, but realize it's exactly that, a manifestation of the mind. But after performing this ritual, is it still just that? Reciting Bloody Mary a multitude of times into a mirror lighted by candles reportedly could conjure an apparition. This would be either in the form of a corpse, witch, ghost, or demonic spirit. Research into this can be traced back decades by folklorists because at one point, this mirror witch conjuring became prevalent across the United States. Different results were reported as well, striking the summoners, driving them mad with fear, or just scratching their face, or simply enough, just peering through the mirror and looking at you. Now, I did not find any factual evidence to support physical harm to anyone who performed these rituals, but there is a plethora of reports of something appearing and just scaring women out of their minds, and just this is after the chanting and they'd be running away freaking out. Now, is this in relation to what we discussed prior? Again, dark room, dim lit candles causing slight hallucinations. It's difficult to say and falls in line with that 99.99% possibility of it being fake. But then you have that 0.01% that maybe it is real. Maybe someone is running out of that bathroom seeing something absolutely terrifying but very vividly real. If something is genuinely appearing, though, in the mirror, then maybe that could tie us back to the idea that mirrors can act as portals, something maybe interdimensional. Alternatively, I could test this theory myself, but I promised my wife I wouldn't for the sake of our daughter, and I'm not really keen on standing in front of a mirror and inciting this, so there'll be no unprofessional demonic conjurations in my house, I can tell you that. I digress, though. The concept of mirrors acting as portals appears in multiple beliefs. In fact, some cultures would actually practice covering mirrors in a home where death had occurred. And this is because of the belief that should a deceased individual catch a glimpse of themselves in a mirror, their spirit would be trapped to the mirror forever. And on a less scarier note, mirrors in the media have become a prominent feature showing off alternate realities and such. And I defer to The Sorcerer's Apprentice with Jay Baruchel and Nicolas Cage, where they would basically toss an individual into a mirror, trapping them. The mirror reality would also be a spitting mirrored reflection of the real world, no pun intended, similar to Marvel's Doctor Strange, where the character could essentially send you off to the mirror dimension. And so it was basically detached from our own, and everything that happened, it was contained to that outside of what was going on in our dimension. But circling back on the note of covering a mirror when you're with someone who will pass, I have a report from a mother who moved her family into their parents' house after they had passed. It was natural death, nothing peculiar for when their time came. They converted their home into a hospice, though, so they could be comfortable and just reside at home. And this was primarily the living room, which also, as reported, there was a mirror that sat on the wall, always facing the bed. And after the family had moved into the home, they decided to keep the mirror where it was because it was pretty stylish and it fit with the room's overall decor. And it wasn't until they converted this living room into a bedroom for their youngest, who was 8 at the time, that things started to become a little intense. Now, immediately once the child moved into that space, helping them fall asleep became a very troublesome task. They would end up on the couch the following day or in their siblings' room. So the mother basically asked, like, what can we do to fix the room up so it's up to your liking? And you'd sleep all the way through the night in your own room. That's another red flag here. Can you take the creepy mirror down? That is word for word quote what the child said in response. Now, of course, the mom did take the mirror down. However, the catch here is that she put it into the other child's room. Not even a day went by when that child asked, could the mirror go because it made me feel very creeped out when I went to sleep? Both children described the mirror in a very similar fashion. Ultimately, she admitted that she felt uncomfortable when she left the mirror in her room for the night. It was like something in her stomach was just constantly turning sideways, but nothing beyond that occurred. It was mostly the mutual complaint from her children on separate occasions that caused the concern. With the mirror gone, however, no more issues have taken place within the home. Let me know what you think, though. Do mirrors have the ability just to absorb energies of a departed soul, or do you think it's possible from an alternative reality that mirrors our own, I guess you could say, that they act as a gateway in? In closing on the spiritual aspect of mirrors for this episode, let's jump over to Japan, notably a type of mirror called Shinto. These mirrors were employed to basically ward off evil spirits, so much so that they would mount the mirrors onto the front of their boats. The logic behind this is that when a demon or evil spirits see the reflection and get scared off, it's basically because they are ugly and unnatural in our world. So when it sees itself, it's scared off because of its own appearance that's repelling it. So scientifically speaking here, what if you could use mirrors to contact aliens? In the year 1820, a German mathematical genius by the name of Carl Friedrich Gauss developed an idea for contacting intelligent beings that may be residing on our moon. This concept was much more refined in 1840 by a man named Joseph von Littrow. Basically sharing a similar idea, both men deduced that if they could create a large enough display that could be visible from the moon, beings that reside there could see it and realize Earth had intelligent beings there as well. An important factor here is that the beings would recognize the mathematical design of the display, meaning that math is a universal interplanetary language that could be used to define Earth's intelligence. Ultimately, this idea of building massive mathematical calculations was abandoned, and a new concept was proposed using mirrors in an attempt to shoot flashes of light across space to nearby planets. Gauss came up with an idea that would use roughly 100 mirrors, 16 square feet each. And these would basically reflect sunlight all the way to the moon. However, this was just the start. In 1874, a French inventor called Charles Cros began experimenting with focusing electrical light to specific planets using parabolic mirrors. And parabolic mirrors basically are used in optics, lenses, stuff like that. Basically, they're really good at gathering and reflecting light in telescopes, searchlights, and headlights as well. So, after years and years, these ideas of using mirrors became much more expensive, but theoretically exhibited exciting possibilities. The reason I wanted to bring it up because on a paranormal level, you have mirrors dating back centuries and being labeled as gateways between realities, or in the scientific community at least, you now have mirrors used as a communication gateway between planets. The same device paralleling along two similarities just fascinated me. So, in closing to this episode, let's explore the causative mirror, which might just bridge the gap between what we've talked about scientifically and spiritually. So, during the time of Stalin, a Russian scientist worked on schematics for a hypothetical time machine of sorts. Now, he passed away before he could actually build it, but other scientists that he had known went ahead with its construction. Now, I'm not sure if they were affiliated with the original scientists or were employed after the fact by other forces or corporations, but they successfully managed to replicate and complete it by the 1990s, thus also beginning experiments. So what the causative mirror is basically a pseudoscientific device made from either long reflective aluminum sheets, glass, or other mirror-like materials, which are then curled into a cylindrical spiral. It apparently can focus different types of radiation, including that radiation that comes from biological objects. So when those objects are put inside the spiral, reportedly this yielded very interesting extrasensory perception among the subjects. Really, really interesting stuff. Several of these people reported feeling a sense of unexplainable primal fear when placed inside the mirrored spiral, and many also reported a multitude of visions and signs. Coincidentally enough, similar reports between subjects that had no interaction with each other. Many of these symbols seen were later identified as symbols used in Sumerian writings. Funny how mirrors played an interesting role, as we discussed earlier in the Epic of Gilgamesh in Sumerian mythology. However, I digress. The crazy thing here is that in addition to the symbols, the subjects reported seeing visions of the past. And not only in their own lives, but in general worldly past events in history itself too. Other presences were also reported to be nearby, and when the subjects were in this state, some of these reports were feeling like, hey, I'm actually being touched by something. And then, of course, you have the visual reports, much more rare. But these white humanoid entities were reportedly preaching the same doomsday warning of a coming disaster. And so the frequency of these experiments just ended up causing a lot of short-term side effects like nausea, dizziness, headaches, and in some very, very worst cases, long-lasting mental effects. So looking outside of the building where these experiments are being conducted, a rise in UFO sightings did absolutely begin to occur, which is interesting because in present-day scenarios, you have former Air Force personnel reporting a high frequency of UFO sightings at their former base of operations, but the individuals working at this building and on these experiments would often see these UFOs along with other strange phenomena in the sky, including magnetic interference on their equipment. So while this experiment has prompted a plethora of new theoretical ideas, some scientists working on the project, while becoming more concerned, deduced that they tapped into another dimension with these mirrors. But I'm curious what you think. These experiments do showcase and reiterate how mirrors possibly contain a way of travel between each other, or possibly another realm. And so it's truly fascinating how much power a reflective surface could contain. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Remember, you can find us on our website, CryptidClues.ca, X, formerly Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. You can also send us an email via CryptidClues@gmail.com. A little foresight here. If I'm lucky enough and can pull it off, I'm going to be treating Reuben to an interesting episode this week for releasing following Monday, where we're going to play audio sounds and just have him try to identify the animals. There'll be a couple of cool little surprises in there relating to cryptids, but it'll be a good way to test Reuben and just get him back on the show. It's been a good minute. He's been busy. I've been busy. It's always hard to align schedules these days, but I digress. We'll be back next week. So until then, everyone, take care and stay safe.